The knock came while I was looking at the heater controls in my car, trying to decide whether running the engine for 10 more minutes was worth the gas. It was 3:38 in the morning. I remember that because the dashboard clock was one of the few things in my life still working exactly as it should. Outside, the lot was still and flat under a thin layer of old snow, the kind that had been driven over so many times it turned gray around the edges. I was parked near the far end of a grocery store lot outside Missoula, Montana, where the light poles hummed softly and the cold pressed against the windows hard enough to leave a film of ice in the corners. Then the flashlight hit my face. "Sir, step out of the vehicle." I sat there for a second with both hands on the steering wheel. I was wearing 2 sweatshirts, a winter coat, gloves with the fingertips worn through, and a knit cap pulled down over my ears. Still, I could feel the cold in my teeth. I opened the door slowly and stepped out. The officer was young, late 20s maybe, clean posture, neutral voice. He looked at me, then at the blankets folded across the back seat, then at the plastic grocery bag on the passenger floor with a toothbrush and a bottle of aspirin in it. License and registration. I handed them over without saying much. There wasn't much to say. My name is Daniel Mercer. I was 43 years old that winter. 8 months earlier, I had been a regional operations director for a shipping company outside Spokane, Washington. I made good money. Not extraordinary money, but enough for a house payment, a retirement account, health insurance, dinners out on Fridays, and the quiet assumption that life would remain more or less intact if I kept doing my part. By December, I was sleeping in a 2011 Honda Accord with $36 in my checking account and a phone bill I could not pay. The officer studied my ID for a moment, then walked back to his cruiser. I stood there in the cold and watched my own breath drift past the beam of his headlights. Somewhere across the lot, a loose cart bumped gently against a curb every few seconds. Metal on concrete, then quiet, then again. I had learned that humiliation is rarely loud. Most of the time it is very plain. A parking lot at night, a stranger checking your name, your own coat smelling faintly of stale coffee because you spilled some on it 2 days earlier and had nowhere to wash it. The officer stayed in his car longer than seemed necessary. At first I thought nothing of it. Then I noticed him lean toward the computer screen, then sit back, then reach for the radio. That changed the feeling of the night. He spoke quietly into the mic, listened, looked through the windshield at me once, then looked away. A minute later he stepped out again, but this time he did not come all the way over. "Just stay where you are for me, Mr. Mercer." His tone had changed. Not hostile. Careful. Am I in some kind of trouble? "No, sir." He paused. "I just need you to wait here." That was the kind of sentence that leaves too much room for your own thoughts. I stood with my hands in my coat pockets and tried to think of anything in my life that could explain a police officer calling someone in the middle of the night because of my driver's license. There was nothing. I had no record, no unpaid tickets, no warrant, no fight in a bar 20 years ago that had somehow followed me across state lines. Nothing. About 12 minutes later, another vehicle rolled into the lot. Not a patrol SUV, an unmarked one, dark color, government clean. It parked beside the cruiser, and an older man stepped out in a heavy coat and plain clothes. The two of them spoke near the hood with their backs partly turned toward me. I could see the younger officer gesture once in my direction. The older man looked over, just for a second, then looked down at something in his hand. When they came toward me, the older one did the talking. "Mr. Mercer," he said, "I need to confirm a few details." His voice was calm, not rushed, not aggressive. He had the kind of face that doesn't waste movement. "Go ahead." He studied me for a moment, then asked, "What was your mother's maiden name?" That landed harder than I expected. My mother had been gone for 19 years. Ovarian cancer. Slow and unfair. I still remembered the hand lotion she used in the hospital because it was one of the only normal smells in that room. "Bennett," I said. Her name was Laura Bennett. The older man gave one small nod, as if that completed something in his mind. He stepped aside and made a phone call right there in the cold. He kept his back mostly turned, but I could hear enough to know he was repeating my full name and birth date to someone who already knew why those details mattered. When he ended the call, he looked at me differently. Not warmly, not suspiciously either, just carefully. "Mr. Mercer," he said, "is there somewhere nearby we can sit down for a bit? Somewhere warm." I glanced at my car. Frost along the inside of the windshield. 2 blankets. A folded sweatshirt where I'd been using it as a pillow. "There's a diner off reserve," I said. He nodded once. "All right." The younger officer stayed near my car while I gathered a few things. Phone charger, wallet, a small notebook I kept in the glove box. Nothing valuable, just habit. When a person has lost enough, routine starts to matter more than value. I locked the door and slipped the keys into my coat pocket. Then I followed them through the dark lot toward the road, with the cold air in my lungs and no clear idea why two men had suddenly become interested in my mother's last name. Then I waited. The diner was open all night and looked like it had been open all decade. Warm air met us at the door, carrying the smell of burned coffee, frying oil, and something sweet from the pie case near the register. The windows were a little fogged. A country song played low through ceiling speakers. Two men in work jackets sat at the counter eating eggs without speaking. I followed the older man to a booth near the back. Red vinyl seat, cracked in one corner. A sugar dispenser with grains scattered around it. The kind of place where nobody asks questions unless they need to. A waitress came over with a tired but steady expression and poured coffee into 3 mugs before anyone ordered. Then she looked at me and said, "You want food?" "Yes," I said. That was all. A few minutes later I had toast, eggs, hash browns, and sausage in front of me. I ate more quickly than I meant to. Hunger narrows a person. You stop pretending not to need things. The older man let me finish half the plate before he spoke again. "My name is Robert Harlan," he said. "I work with a federal office that handles identity verification and protective records." He placed a leather credential wallet on the table, just long enough for me to see that this was not local and not casual. The younger officer from the parking lot had stayed behind. It was just the two of us now. "I'm not under arrest," I said. "No, am I in danger?" He took a sip of coffee first. "Not to delay, just measured. I don't believe you are in immediate danger tonight." That answer was precise in a way I did not enjoy. He looked at my plate, waited until I set my fork down, then asked, "Mr. Mercer, do you know much about your mother's family?" "No, nothing at all. Almost nothing." That was true. My mother had never spoken much about where she came from. Growing up, I knew a few simple things. She had been raised near Tacoma. She was good at math. She kept a neat kitchen. She folded grocery bags into tight triangles and stored them under the sink. She loved old jazz records and rainy afternoons and cleaning one room at a time when she was worried. As for family, there were almost no names. No uncles visiting at Christmas. No cousins. No stories that lasted more than a sentence or two. If I asked, she would say, "It's complicated," with a soft final tone that meant the conversation was over. My father had been easier to understand. He was a union electrician. Strong hands. Quiet man. He fixed things before talking about them. When my mother was alive, he let her silence stay where she placed it. After she died, he kept doing the same. By the time he passed, 5 years later, whatever answers there may have been had settled somewhere I could no longer reach. "I know her maiden name," I said. "That's about it." Harlan nodded once and folded his hands on the table. "Your mother, Laura Bennett, had a brother." I looked at him. "That doesn't make sense." "I understand." "No," I said, calmer than I felt. "I mean, I would have known that. Maybe not everything, but I would have known she had a brother. She had reasons for not discussing him." That was the first moment I felt something shift under the surface. Not panic, not belief either, just the sense that I had stepped onto ground that was not as solid as it looked. The waitress returned and topped off my coffee. Harlan waited until she left. "His name was Charles Bennett," he said. In the late 1980s, he founded an aerospace and defense manufacturing firm in Washington state. It expanded quickly. By the mid-1990s, it held several federal contracts tied to navigation systems and secure communications. I said nothing. The booth felt smaller. A truck passed outside, and its headlights moved across the glass, then disappeared. "You're telling me my mother's brother owned some kind of defense company. I'm telling you that your mother came from a family connected to a business that drew attention from governments, private contractors, and foreign actors during a particular period." That was how federal people speak when the simple version still sounds unbelievable. I leaned back against the booth and looked down at my coffee. A thin line of steam lifted from the cup and vanished. "My mother was a receptionist at a dental office for 20 years, I said. "My father rewired apartment buildings and schools. We lived in a split-level house with one bathroom and a garage door that never closed right in winter. Nobody in my family had a private jet or secret accounts. I'm not suggesting otherwise. Then what are you suggesting? That the public version of your family history was intentionally reduced. He let that sit between us. I thought about my mother's locked desk drawer when I was a kid. The small brass key she wore on a ring inside her purse. The way she once took a phone call in the laundry room with the door shut and came out looking like she had aged in 10 minutes. At the time, I assumed it had something to do with test results from the doctor. Years later, I forgot all about it. Memory changes shape when new facts arrive. Things you dismissed begin to lean toward meaning. Harlan reached into a slim folder and removed a photocopy of a form. He placed it on the table and turned it toward me. It was old, government paper, thick black redactions in some places. At the top, I saw my full name, date of birth, and a classification label I did not understand. Lower down was my mother's name, then a reference to protected lineage records tied to the Bennett family. I read the page twice. My throat had gone dry. This is real. Yes. Since when? He looked at the paper for a moment. The original record was created when you were 11. 11. I did the math without meaning to. That was the year my mother stopped letting me walk home alone from school. The year she changed our phone number and would not explain why. The year my father installed better locks on the doors and motion lights over the garage. I had thought they were just being cautious. Why would a record like this exist for me? Harlan slid the page back into the folder. Because your uncle died under conditions that led to a long-standing protective structure around surviving relatives. The phrase surviving relatives caught in my head, and I'm one of them. Yes. I looked at him for a long time. Then I looked out the window at the parking lot, where snow had begun again in a thin, dry drift that barely showed under the streetlights. 8 months earlier, my wife had told me, in our kitchen, that I should stop dragging out a marriage that had already ended. She said it while standing at the counter in a cream-colored blouse I had bought her for our anniversary the year before. There was a mug in her hand. Chamomile tea. She always drank chamomile when she wanted to sound reasonable. Her name was Elise. We had been married 6 years, together for 9. I met her at a charity luncheon in Spokane where my company had sponsored a supply drive for middle school students. She handled donor relations for a hospital network. She was organized, polished, and unusually good at making people feel that agreeing with her had been their idea all along. For a long time, I thought that was grace. Later, I learned it could also be method. The change in her came slowly, then all at once. More late evenings, more private calls, new clothes with tags still hidden in the closet, little corrections in her tone when she spoke to me, as if I had become an inconvenience she was trying to manage professionally. I kept thinking the pressure would pass. People do that in marriages. They misread decline as stress because it hurts less. When the truth arrived, it did not arrive loudly. I found it in a printed packet on our home office desk. Not hidden, just placed under a legal pad as if it belonged there. Bank statements, draft separation terms, emails with a family law attorney in Boise named Grant Holloway. I remember standing there with one hand on the chair back, reading a sentence 3 times because I could not make it settle into meaning. Your husband's retirement accounts, bonus structures, and premarital property positions can be neutralized if we move quickly on venue and disclosure timing. Neutralized. That was the word. When I confronted Elise that evening, she did not deny the attorney. She did not deny the planning either. She set her mug in the sink, dried her hands on a dish towel, and said, "I didn't want a scene." It was a very smooth sentence. Well practiced. I asked if there was someone else. She looked at me for a moment, then said, "That isn't the point," which is how people answer when it is exactly the point. There was someone else. His name was Stephen Vale, a partner at the same Boise law firm advising her on the divorce. He was older than us both, careful in public, ambitious in private, and apparently confident enough to help shape the terms of a marriage he was already stepping into. I did not yell, not because I was noble. I simply could not get my mind to move fast enough for anger. Over the next 4 months, the structure of my life was taken apart in a sequence of clean professional steps. Accounts frozen, property valuations challenged, separate property blurred into marital use, records interpreted in ways that always seemed to benefit timing, pressure, and cost. By the end of it, I had sold the house, lost most of what I had built, and moved through the remaining money faster than I thought possible while trying to stay employable and upright. Then my company reorganized. Then the interviews slowed. Then winter came. And now I was in a diner at 4 in the morning with a federal officer telling me my dead mother had a brother I had never met and that my life had been sitting inside some sealed system since childhood. I rubbed my hands together once to bring warmth back into them. What exactly are you saying happens next? Harlan reached into his coat pocket and placed a business card on the table. No logo, just a name, a direct number, and a federal building address in Seattle. By morning, he said, a trust representative will be in contact. There are documents that need to be reviewed in person. Identity confirmation, historical filings, estate records. I looked at the card, then at him. Estate records. Yes. For my uncle. Yes. I waited. He saw that and gave me the part he had been holding. Your uncle left a structured estate, he said. It was not released at the time due to security concerns and succession restrictions. Based on those restrictions, your file became active again this year. This year, why? He met my eyes directly. Because you reached the triggering age. I felt the words before I understood them. Not in my head, in my chest. Are you telling me, I said slowly, that someone has been waiting for me to turn a certain age? Yes. The coffee had gone cold. I wrapped both hands around the mug anyway. And this estate, I said, is it small enough to explain in one sentence or not? For the first time, Robert Harlan let a few seconds pass before answering. Then he opened the folder again, drew out a second sheet, and set it face down on the table between us. That, he said, is better discussed once you've had time to sit with the first part. I looked at the paper. I did not turn it over. Not yet. Then I waited. I did not turn the paper over right away. I looked at it. Plain white sheet. Sharp corners. Full line across the middle. Nothing dramatic about it. That was part of what made the moment feel real. Life rarely announces itself with music. Most of the time it is a document on a diner table while the coffee cools beside it. Robert Harlan left it there and let the silence do its work. Outside, the snow moved past the window in a light sideways drift. Inside, somebody at the counter asked for more syrup. A spoon tapped against a ceramic mug. The waitress carried a plate of pancakes past our booth without looking in our direction. I kept my hands around the coffee cup for a few seconds longer, then finally set it down and turned the page over. At the bottom was a number. I read it once and assumed I had placed the decimal in the wrong spot. I looked again, then a third time, slower. The estate value listed on the sheet was not $1 million. It was not $10 million. It was far enough beyond that range that my mind stopped treating it as money and began treating it as a formatting issue. There were commas where I did not expect them. I set the paper down carefully. This is wrong. No, there has to be another Daniel Mercer. There isn't. I looked at the number again, then at the heading above it. Estate Reserve Summary. Consolidated Holdings. Restricted release conditions satisfied pending identity confirmation. It felt like reading a file about someone I had never met. How much of this is actually liquid? I asked. It was the first practical question that came to mind, and I remember that because later I realized it told me something useful about myself. Even then, half frozen and underslept and living out of a car, my mind still went to structure before fantasy. Harlan seemed to notice that too. Not all of it, he said. The estate includes investment holdings, private shares, real property, long-term trust positions, and managed accounts. The exact breakdown will be explained by the trustees. Trustees. Yes. How many? 5 primary. 2 alternates. I nodded once. There is a point in certain conversations where disbelief becomes inefficient. You do not fully believe yet, but you understand that refusing to engage will not change the facts in front of you. So your mind shifts from denial to procedure. That was the moment for me. Not peace. Not excitement. Procedure. I straightened the paper, aligned it with the edge of the table, and asked, what has to happen before anyone hands me anything? Harlan answered without hesitation. Step 1, identity confirmation in person with the trust office in Seattle. Step 2, review of the sealed family records and release conditions. Step 3, execution of estate control documents and financial access protocols. I nodded again. Good. He watched me for a second. You're taking this calmly. No, I said. I'm taking it in order. That seemed to satisfy him. He removed another document from the folder. This one was a travel packet. Flight reservation. Temporary lodging arrangement. A contact list with names and direct extensions. One page had a timeline printed on it in simple blocks. 7:30 a.m., Transport 11:15 a.m. Seattle arrival 1 p.m. Trust office intake 3 p.m. Legal briefing 5:30 p.m. Secured residence access. I almost laughed at that. 8 hours earlier, I had been folding a sweatshirt in my back seat to make room to sleep. Now someone had written secured residence access on a schedule meant for me. Who paid for all this? I asked. The trust. Since when? Since the file was reactivated. And when was that? He checked one of the sheets. 4 months ago. I looked up sharply. 4 months. Yes. I did the math. That lined up almost exactly with my birthday. It also lined up with the month my last stable piece of life gave way. The divorce terms finalized. My role at work dissolved in restructuring. The savings account dropped from manageable to frightening. All while somewhere, apparently, an old legal mechanism had begun moving in my direction. There was no comfort in that timing, but there was shape. I asked the next question quietly. Why didn't anyone find me sooner? Harlan folded his hands again. Your file required layered verification. The original record protections were old. Some were physical, not digital. The trust office had to confirm lineage, status, and exposure risk before direct contact. They were also under instructions not to trigger public inquiry, meaning they did not want lawyers, brokers, reporters, or opportunists locating you before the file was properly opened. That made more sense than anything else so far. A man with no money can still be expensive if the wrong people believe he is about to gain some. I looked back at the sheet with the estate number on it and felt something unexpected move through me. Not greed, not joy either. Relief, maybe, but even that was incomplete. What I felt most clearly was the return of time. That is the first thing money really buys when you have been without it. Not luxury. Time. Breathing room. The ability to make one decision without 10 other unpaid decisions pushing against it. For months, every hour of my life had been shaped by shortage. How much gas to use, whether to keep the phone on, which meal to skip, whether staying warm tonight would cost too much tomorrow. Now, for the first time in a long while, the pressure of immediate survival loosened by one notch. I did not smile. I did not need to. I just reached for the business card again and slipped it into my wallet. Then I folded the estate sheet once and placed it inside my notebook. Harlan noticed that. Most people would ask to take a picture. My phone battery is at 11%. He gave the smallest nod. Then he slid one more item across the table. It was a sealed envelope. Cream paper, slightly yellowed at the edges. My full name was written across the front in neat handwriting. I knew that handwriting before I fully let myself know it. My mother's. The room lost focus for a second. I did not touch the envelope immediately. What is this? A personal letter retained with the family documents, Harlan said. Instruction was clear. It was to be delivered only upon verified release activation. I looked at the name on the front again. Not Daniel. Not Danny, the way she called me when I was young. Daniel Thomas Mercer. Formal. Deliberate. The way she wrote labels on file folders. I touched the edge of the envelope with one finger. She wrote this one. We believe within the last year of her life. That would have put it near the end, near the hospital, near the period when she was too tired to stand in the kitchen for long and still insisted on straightening the dish towels after dinner. I had spent years thinking the unfinished feeling around her death was grief alone, that there had simply been things no family gets to say in time. Now I understood there had also been things she chose not to say. I opened the envelope carefully so the flap would not tear more than necessary. Inside was a folded letter, several pages long. I read the first line and had to stop. Daniel, if this letter has reached you, then a part of my silence has finally ended. I put the page down for a moment and looked out the window until my breathing settled. Then I read the rest. She apologized first, not in a dramatic way, in her way, clear, specific. She said there had been risks attached to the Bennett name that I was too young to carry and that she had agreed, with more fear than certainty, to let those parts of the family remain sealed around me. She wrote that her brother Charles had loved precision, long workdays, black coffee, and impossible projects. She wrote that he had not trusted many people, but he had trusted her. And because he trusted her, he trusted me without ever getting the chance to know me as an adult. She said he had arranged the estate not as a reward, but as protection delayed until it could no longer do harm. There was one sentence I read 3 times. If life has been hard by the time this reaches you, Do not let that harden you into the wrong shape. That sounded like her. Not polished, not grand, just exact. Further down she wrote that if I was reading the letter, then something formal had already happened and people would be explaining numbers and rules and obligations. She told me not to be impressed by polished men carrying folders. She said the only useful questions were simple ones. Who controls what? Who benefits? Who signs first? Who can remove whom? I almost smiled at that. Even from the grave, my mother was still teaching me how to sit at a table. At the end, she wrote that she hoped I had built an ordinary life. She hoped I had people who knew me by my habits rather than my circumstances. She hoped I had someone who made coffee in the next room while I looked over bills on a Sunday morning and argued with me gently about the grocery list. I stopped there for a while. That line did something the number on the estate sheet had not. It made me feel the distance between the life I was supposed to have and the one I had been living in. I folded the letter back along its original lines and returned it to the envelope with more care than I had opened it. Neither of us spoke for a bit. Then Harlan asked, "Would you like a few minutes alone?" "No," I said. "I'd like the next document." That changed the tone of the table. Not outwardly. The diner remained the diner. Plates moved. Snow fell. Coffee got refilled. But inside the conversation, something had shifted. Until then, I had been reacting. Now I was participating. Harlan took out a legal summary packet and opened it to the first tab. Estate control, release conditions, interim authority, liability buffer structures, temporary advisory protections. The language was dense, but not impossible. I read quietly and asked questions where needed. Who has current authority over distributions? The trustees, jointly, until execution. Can any one of them block the release? Not unilaterally. Has anyone challenged the succession line? Twice. Both attempts failed. When? Once in 2007. Once in 2018. By who? That will be in the Seattle file review. I nodded and kept reading. By the time the waitress came by again, my plate was cold and untouched except for a corner of toast. She asked if I wanted it heated. I told her no. Just more coffee. Harlan waited until she left, then said, "You understand this changes your exposure immediately." I assumed so. Your privacy matters from this point on. It mattered yesterday too. He let that sit, which I respected. I took out my phone and looked at the cracked screen. 11% had become 9. No missed calls. 1 promotional email. 2 job alerts I no longer needed but did not delete yet. I put the phone face down. There is a strange kind of order that appears when your options return. You do not feel bigger. You feel quieter, as if the room has stopped leaning on you. For the first time in months, I began thinking ahead in a way that did not involve surviving the next 48 hours. Not fantasy. Inventory. My car was still in the lot. Inside it, 2 blankets, 1 duffel bag, a shaving kit, tax records, the divorce binder, 3 shirts, a winter coat, and the blue ceramic mug I had been carrying since my first apartment after college. I had wrapped that mug in a dish towel and kept it in the trunk because I could not make myself throw it away. My storage unit outside Spokane was 3 months behind. My remaining debts needed to be listed, not feared. My employment records needed to be preserved before I decided what kind of explanation, if any, I owed the people who had let me go by form letter. And then there was a lease. Or maybe more accurately, there was Stephenvale. Until that morning I had thought of them as the people who had outmaneuvered me while I was too stunned to respond in time. That is a hard position to recover from because humiliation tends to freeze itself in the body. But sitting there with legal documents spread across a diner table, my mother's letter folded in front of me, I felt the first clean separation between pain and strategy. I was not interested in speeches. I was not interested in emotional closure. Those things belong to movies and people with too much time. What interested me now was record, process, sequence. If there had been misconduct in the handling of the divorce, it would live somewhere concrete. Billing entries, venue communications, timing memos, property classification drafts, email trails, small adjustments made too neatly by people certain no one would ever have the resources to revisit them. The thought did not excite me. It settled me. I looked up at Harlan. "In Seattle," I said, "once the estate control documents are reviewed, I'm going to need referrals." "For what kind of work?" "Forensic accounting, civil litigation review, possibly ethics counsel." He watched me for a second longer than usual. Then he said, "I can provide names once your release is complete." Good. He closed the folder halfway. Mr. Mercer, you do understand you are not required to act on anything immediately. I know. Some people would spend the first week buying things. I need a shower, I said. After that, I need a filing system. That almost got a smile out of him. Almost. A little after 6, the sky outside shifted from dark to a dull winter gray. The diner's neon sign looked weaker against it. A delivery truck backed up near the side entrance with 3 soft beeps, then silence. Harlan checked his watch. The car will be here in 10 minutes. I nodded and gathered the documents into the packet the way they had been given to me. Estate sheet first, travel schedule, legal summary, business card, then my mother's letter in its own pocket, separate from everything else. Order matters when your life has just changed shape, even small order. I stood, reached into my coat, and placed enough cash on the table to cover breakfast and more. Harlan looked at the bills. That isn't necessary. Yes, it is. The waitress had treated me like a person at 4 in the morning. That counted. He did not argue. We stepped outside into the cold. It felt sharper now, but cleaner too. Morning traffic had not started yet. My old sedan sat where I had left it, a little farther down the lot, pale with frost. For a few seconds I just looked at it. A practical car. Faded paint. Salt along the lower doors. One headlight slightly clouded. It had carried the last version of my life without complaint. Then I heard a vehicle pull in behind us. Black sedan. Dark windows. Driver in a plain coat. No markings. Harlan opened the rear door and said, "We'll stop for your belongings first." I slipped one hand into my coat pocket and closed my fingers around the car keys. Then I waited. I unlocked the car and opened the driver's door. The cold inside had a stale, closed-up smell to it. Wool blanket. Old paper. A little gasoline from the can I had used 2 nights earlier. Morning light showed everything more plainly than the dark had. The fast food napkins in the console. The scuffed travel mug in the cup holder. The rolled socks tucked beside the emergency kit. Nothing tragic about any of it. Just reduced. I stood there for a moment and took in the back seat. Then I began. One bag first. Then the folder from under the passenger seat. Then the blanket I wanted to keep. Then the small shaving kit and the notebook from the glove compartment. I worked without rushing. A person can lose a lot of dignity by moving too fast in front of strangers. I had already lost enough. Robert Harlan stayed several steps back near the sedan. He did not offer help, which I appreciated. Help is useful. Witnessing is sometimes harder. When I opened the trunk, I found the blue ceramic mug still wrapped in a dish towel beside the jack and spare. I held it for a second, then put it carefully into the duffel. After that I pulled out the cardboard file box I had been carrying since the divorce. That box mattered more than almost anything else I owned. Inside it were tax returns, insurance statements, the house sale documents, employment records, and the entire divorce packet I had never been able to bring myself to throw out. Tabs, sticky notes, legal notices, account summaries, declarations, schedules, disclosures. Every clean page from the neat collapse of my life. I carried the box to the sedan myself. Harlan looked at it once and said, "That should stay with you." It will. When I went back for the last few things, I noticed something I had not expected. My hands were steady. A day earlier, or maybe even an hour earlier, every object in that car had carried the weight of failure. Now they were simply items to be sorted, kept, discarded, stored, replaced. That was the real shift. Not money, not status, sequence. I locked the car again and slipped the keys into my pocket. For a second I thought about leaving it there and telling someone else to deal with towing, storage, transfer, all of it. Instead I asked, "Can this be moved securely?" "Yes," Harlan said. "Not sold. Not touched. I want it cleaned, serviced, and stored." He nodded. "Done." I did not explain why. Some things are not about value. They are about evidence. Not for a court. For yourself. The drive to the airport was quiet at first. The heater in the sedan worked well enough to make me drowsy, and the windows carried that pale blue-gray winter light that shows up before sunrise has fully committed. Missoula slid by in pieces. Gas station canopy. Closed tire shop. Empty intersection. A man in a heavy coat carrying a coffee tray into a hospital side entrance. Normal life. Moving on schedule. I sat in the back with my duffel at my feet and the file box beside me. My mother's letter was inside the notebook in my coat pocket where I could feel its edge when I moved. After a few miles, Harlan turned slightly in the passenger seat, and said, "There are a few practical items we should handle before Seattle." "All right. You will likely receive calls once release notices begin moving through the appropriate firms and agencies. Some legitimate, some not, meaning people will come out of nowhere." "Yes. Then I want a new phone and a new number before noon." He made a note. "I also want digital copies made of everything in this file box before anybody else touches it." "Understood. And I want an index." He glanced back at me. "An index? Every document. Date, source, category, relevance. Start broad. We can refine later. Would you like the trust office to handle that?" "No." I looked out the window for a moment. "I want a separate team." That mattered. The trust was inheriting me as much as I was inheriting it. That did not make them enemies, but it did make them interested parties. My mother's letter had been clear enough on that point. Ask who controls what. Ask who benefits. Ask who signs first. I was not suspicious of everyone. I was simply done being passive inside formal systems. I took out my notebook and turned to a blank page. At the top, I wrote 3 lines. Step 1, secure records. Step 2, verify all authorities. Step 3, review the divorce. Then I added a 4th. Step 4, do nothing in anger. I underlined that one once. That was for me. It would have been easy, in that moment, to confuse restored power with urgent action. But I had seen too many people make expensive decisions just because they were finally in a position to make any decision at all. Money creates speed if you let it. Speed creates sloppiness. Sloppiness gives other people room. No, not this time. If there had been manipulation in the divorce, I would find it through paper, timing, and professional review. Not pride. I put the notebook away. At the airport, everything became more organized very quickly. A woman in a charcoal coat met us near a side entrance and introduced herself as Elaine Porter from the trust office. Mid-50s. Efficient. No wasted gestures. She handed me a slim folder with an itinerary, temporary cards, and a short list titled Immediate Personal Logistics. The list included clothing, communications, residence access, document handling, medical scheduling, and private transportation. I read it once and said, "Add dental." She blinked, then wrote it down without comment. That made me trust her slightly more. People reveal themselves in how they respond to ordinary needs. If they only understand spectacle, they are dangerous around money. The flight to Seattle was on a small private jet, which would have embarrassed me if I had any energy left for embarrassment. I slept for 40 minutes with my coat folded under my head and woke just before descent with the taste of old coffee still in my mouth. At Boeing Field, another car was waiting. Seattle was wet in the way only Seattle can be. Not dramatic rain, just the steady, gray kind that softens edges and leaves every surface reflecting something. We drove through industrial streets first, then denser downtown blocks, then toward a part of the city where glass towers gave way to older brick and restored stone. The trust offices were on the upper floors of a building that looked expensive without asking to be admired. Inside, everything was quiet. Thick carpet, matte brass fixtures, reception area with fresh flowers that did not smell like much. A woman at the desk offered coffee, tea, still water, sparkling water, and something green in a tall bottle. "Coffee," I said. The conference room had windows looking out across Elliott Bay under a low ceiling of cloud. On the table were 5 folders, 3 pens, 1 legal pad, and a tray with pastries arranged more neatly than anyone needed. I set my own file box on the floor beside my chair and kept my notebook in front of me. Then the trustees came in. 5 of them. Different ages. Different specialties. Same train com. The lead was a woman named Margaret Sloan. Early 70s, silver hair pulled back, navy suit, direct eyes. She shook my hand once and said, "Mr. Mercer, I'm sorry it took so long to get you here." We agreed on the structure in plain terms. Stephen Vale would be greeted as though this were what he requested, a private professional meeting. No accusation on entry. No hostile staging. He would sit. We would exchange basics. Then I would define the purpose. Denise and Mark would join the conversation after the first few minutes. Not as a surprise attack, but as clarity. I asked for one additional thing. Have a printed copy of the 3 flag sequences ready. Nothing more. Mark looked at me. "You don't want the full binder?" "No, why not?" "Because I'm not trying to prove the whole case today." He watched me for a moment, then nodded once. "Good." At 4:05, Elaine texted from reception. "Mr. Vale has arrived." Alone. I stood, adjusted the cuff of my shirt, and waited by the window. A minute later, the door opened. Stephen Vale stepped in wearing a dark raincoat over a navy suit, carrying no briefcase, just a slim folio and the expression of a man who had rehearsed 3 different versions of charm in the elevator. He was handsome in the polished way that depends heavily on maintenance. Late 40s, controlled posture, hair carefully silvering at the temples. He smiled as soon as he saw me. "Daniel." I did not move from where I stood. "Stephen." He extended a hand anyway. When I did not take it, he let it fall back without comment. "That's all right," he said lightly. "I understand this is an unusual moment." "Yes," I said. "Sit down." He sat. I remained standing for 1 more second, then took the chair opposite him. Rain traced faint lines down the window behind me. The room was quiet enough that I could hear the soft click of the building's ventilation. He glanced once around the room. "Private setup." "Yes." "Well," he said, offering a measured smile. "First, let me say I'm glad to see you well. I heard there had been some major personal developments, and despite everything, I thought it would be appropriate to reach out directly." I said nothing. He continued, "I know our previous involvement occurred during a difficult period. Emotions run high in family matters. Sometimes people later feel processes were harsher than they needed to be. There it was. Not apology, not ownership. Atmosphere." I folded my hands on the table. "This isn't about emotion." His smile thinned slightly. "All right. This is about sequence." He held my eyes. "Sequence." "Yes. Dates. Access. Disclosures. Venue timing. Draft control. Communication chains." The room became still in a different way then. Not dramatic. Just narrower. Stephen leaned back a fraction. "I'm not sure what you've been told." "That's fortunate," I said, "because I'm interested in what can be shown, not told." He kept his face composed, but I saw the first small change at the jaw. "Daniel, if there are concerns about how your divorce was handled, there are established ways to raise them." "Yes," I said. "That's why we're here." He glanced once toward the door as if recalibrating the room. "This is a meeting, not a filing." "Correct. Then perhaps you could be more specific." I reached to my right, took the top page from the small stack Mark had left for me, and slid it across the table. Stephen looked down. It was a simple comparison sheet. 3 entries, 3 dates, 3 discrepancies. No accusation language, just reference points. Asset revision timestamp preceding source valuation disclosure addendum log before documented receipt of account records courier sequence inconsistent with notarized filing date. He read it once, and then again more slowly. When he looked up, his expression had not collapsed. Men like Stephen do not collapse quickly. They sort. They test. "Administrative irregularities happen," he said. "I agree. In complex dissolutions, especially across jurisdictions, date mismatches can arise from processing delays." "I agree. Then I'm not sure why we're sitting here. Because this is the part where I ask whether you'd prefer to preserve the full record voluntarily before outside demands begin." That changed him. Not visibly to most people, but enough. He set the page down with great care. "You've retained someone." "Yes." "Who?" I did not answer. He gave a short breath through his nose. Not quite a laugh. "Well, you've moved quickly." "No," I said. "I've moved in order." That line landed. I could see it. He shifted his focus back to the page. "If this is meant to imply misconduct, I'd advise caution." "At the moment," I said, "I'm implying interest." That was when the door opened and Denise Carver and Mark Farella stepped in. No rush. No theater. Just 2 professionals entering a meeting already underway. Stephen looked from one to the other and then back to me. The practiced warmth was gone now. Not anger yet. Just the effort of staying smooth while recalculating. Mark sat at my left. Denise at my right. Stephen's voice was cooler when he spoke again. "I assume introductions are in order." "They are," I said. "Mr. Varela is litigation counsel. Ms. Carver handles ethics review." A pause. Stephen nodded once. "I see." Denise placed a thin notepad on the table. "Mr. Vale." He looked at her, recognized the title in her card when she set it down, and understood at least one layer more than he had when he entered. For the first time, he stopped trying to guide the conversation. That was the confrontation. Not yelling, not accusation, not spectacle. Just the moment reality stopped bending around a version he preferred. I leaned forward slightly. "This meeting is simple," I said. "You have an opportunity to preserve all materials connected to my divorce matter and any associated pre-filing communications immediately. Full preservation. No deletions. No device turnover. No quiet cleanup. No assistant-level scrubbing. If that happens, review can proceed professionally. His eyes hardened. And if it doesn't? I held his gaze. Then process proceeds without your cooperation. The rain kept moving down the glass behind me. Somewhere far below, a fairy horn sounded once over the water and then faded. Stephen sat very still. Then he said, "You think you can pressure me because you came into money." "No," I said. "I think documents age badly when people get overconfident." That one landed too. He looked at the 3 flagged entries again, then at Denise, then at Mark. Finally, he straightened the edge of the comparison sheet with 2 fingers and said, very evenly, "I'll speak to my counsel." That would be wise. He stood. No one else did. He took his folio, buttoned his coat, and paused at the end of the table. For a second, I thought he might try one last version of easy professionalism. Instead, he looked at me with something flatter than anger. "You're making a mistake if you think old paperwork is going to give you back your life." I answered him in the same tone I had used all afternoon. "I'm not trying to get my life back." He waited. "I'm establishing the record." That was the end of it. He left without another word. The door closed softly behind him. No one in the room spoke for several seconds. Mark finally exhaled and said, "Well." Denise looked at the door, then at me. He came in thinking this was reputational management. Yes. He left understanding it might be evidence preservation. Yes. She capped her pen. Good. I stood and walked to the window. Rain over the bay. Ferries moving as if nothing in the city had changed. Office lights beginning to come on in towers across the water. People on sidewalks below carrying umbrellas and grocery bags and laptops and all the plain cargo of ordinary days. Behind me, I could hear Mark and Denise already moving into the next practical layer. Draft the preservation notices. Confirm all recipients. Timestamp service. Prepare for resistance. Coordinate with Nora on metadata requests. That was exactly what I wanted. No speeches. No triumph. Just motion. I put one hand in my pocket and felt the folded edge of my mother's letter there again. Who controls what? Who benefits? Who signs first? Who can remove whom? I had the beginning of those answers now. Not all of them. Not yet. But enough to keep going. Then I turned back to the table, and we started the paperwork. The preservation notices went out before 6 that evening. Not eventually. Not the next morning. That evening. Mark Varela drafted them in the conference suite, while Denise Carver reviewed the scope and Nora Ellison fed in the document categories that mattered most. By the time I got back to the townhouse, 4 firms, 2 courier vendors, 1 document processing service, and 3 individual attorneys had been formally instructed to preserve every paper file, digital record, draft, billing note, metadata trail, calendar entry, scan log, and communication connected to my divorce matter. That was the first real consequence. Not because anyone had been accused in public. Nothing like that. The consequence was that the past had stopped being soft. It had been fixed in place. People behave differently once they understand that records will be checked against one another by professionals who are paid to notice what does not line up. I made tea that night instead of coffee and sat at the kitchen table with the lights low. No television, no music, just the sound of rain in the downspout outside and the occasional passing car on the hill below. The house had already started to feel less like temporary housing and more like a place with corners I could think in. At 8:14 p.m., Elaine sent the first summary log. Vale Holloway had acknowledged receipt. So had local co-counsel in Montana. So had the courier vendor. My former attorney, Alan Huxley, had responded differently. His office sent a brief note requesting an immediate call and attaching a statement that he welcomed any review and would provide his full file without objection. That got my attention. The next morning, we started with him. Alan Huxley appeared by secure video at 9. Mid-50s, rumpled suit, tired eyes. Office behind him full of stacked paper and law books that looked used rather than decorative. He did not waste time pretending he was pleased to be there. "Daniel," he said, "I owe you a clean answer." "Yes," I said. "You do." He nodded once. I didn't know about any pre-disclosure access. If I had, I would have raised hell. "Did you suspect it?" "I suspected I was being outmaneuvered." "That's not the same thing." He had his full file open in front of him. Billing entries, call notes, courier slips, hearing prep. I asked him to walk us through the weeks around the final property schedules and venue motions. He did, slowly, carefully, without trying to make himself look better than he had been. That mattered too. A useful truth is rarely clean. Usually it includes somebody who was not malicious, just inattentive or overloaded in exactly the wrong place. By the end of 90 minutes, 3 things were clear. First, Huxley had been receiving revised materials later than opposing counsel appeared to be referencing them. Second, he had flagged one scheduling anomaly at the time, but let it go because the court was pressing deadlines and the filings arrived looking technically proper. Third, his assistant still had archived fax logs and intake scans that had never been included in the final litigation file because nobody had asked for them. Nora's head came up at that. Can we get those today? Yes, Huxley said immediately. I'll have them exported within the hour. He looked at me then, not defensively, just directly. I should have slowed it down. I didn't. That's on me. I let that sit for a second. I'm not interested in punishing people for being tired, I said. I'm interested in the record. He nodded. Then I'll help build it. By noon we had enough material to move from pattern to structure. The fax logs showed receipt gaps. The intake scans showed that one supposedly final exhibit packet had arrived in 2 waves, but had been filed as though it were one complete transmission. A courier manifest from the Montana office placed one envelope in the courthouse building a full business day after the notarized acknowledgement had been stamped. Again, none of that by itself proved intentional fraud. Together, it proved something better at that stage. The official sequence could not be trusted. Denise prepared the bar complaint threshold memo that afternoon. Not filing yet. Threshold. What professional rules might be implicated if further records supported what we were seeing? Candor to tribunal. Document integrity. Improper access. Coordination across counsel in a way that may have prejudiced disclosure fairness. Mark prepared the civil route in parallel. Motion structure. Discovery demands. Protective requests. Forum considerations. I read both memos in the study while the scanner hummed on the desk beside me. Then I put the phone face down. That phrase had become a habit by then, a way of telling myself to stay with the paper in front of me and not drift toward noise. At 4:20 p.m., Nora got the first real break. Not from a dramatic confession, not from some secret recording in a parking garage. From metadata. The law firm's produced PDF for one of the revised asset schedules had been scrubbed clean when served in the divorce. But an archived scan recovered from Huxley's assistant's system preserved a printer path and embedded revision stub. It pointed to an internal working file that had passed through a Vale Holloway device 2 days before the bank statements it relied on had officially been disclosed to either side. Nora read the result once, then handed the page to me. There, she said. That's not smoke. I read the timestamp, the file trace, and the originating user tag. Stephen Vale had not merely benefited from sequence confusion. His office had touched the numbers early. I set the page down very carefully. What does this prove exactly? Nora answered in the calm voice she used for everything. It proves access to content before lawful exchange, or fabrication using undisclosed source material. Either one is serious. Combined with the filing chain issues, it gives us a foundation. Denise was already making notes. A very good foundation, she said. The next 48 hours were almost entirely procedural. No dramatic meetings. No public announcements. Just service, review, response windows, and more documents arriving from places people usually forget matter until it's too late. Print Q logs. A billing narrative from a paralegal entry that referenced revised marital exposure table before the underlying account production date. A calendar hold on Stephen Vale's assistant's account labeled Montana sequencing call 3 days before the venue packet was finalized. A courier service correction email noting that one package had been held for instruction update before delivery. Each item by itself was modest. Together they made the same quiet point. The divorce had not unfolded naturally. It had been arranged. By Friday, Mark recommended filing. Not the whole war, he said, sitting across from me in the study with a draft motion in front of him. Just the right first case. Controlled scope. Document integrity and disclosure sequence. Enough to force preservation under court supervision and trigger outside interest. Denise agreed. And once the court sees the chronology, the ethics side becomes much harder for them to dismiss as sour grapes. I read the draft motion line by line. That part took time. I wanted every phrase plain. No swollen language. No moral theater. Just dates, exhibits, inconsistencies, and requests grounded in rule. When I finished, I signed the authorization page and slid it back across the desk. File it, Mark did. That was the second real consequence. The first had been fixing the past in place. The second was placing it in a forum where other people had to account for it. News did not break that day. Court filings do not become stories instantly, no matter what television teaches people. For almost a week, everything stayed mostly within lawyers' hands. Then the responses started. Vale Holloway denied wrongdoing, of course, strongly, professionally. They described the irregularities as administrative misunderstandings, harmless processing artifacts, and opportunistic reinterpretations by a former party experiencing post-judgment dissatisfaction. That last phrase almost impressed me. There is a very specific kind of arrogance in trying to turn documented sequence problems into a mood disorder. The problem for them was that the record kept getting worse. The court ordered preservation oversight, then targeted production, then a hearing. At that hearing, held by remote video for the preliminary scheduling phase, Stephen Vale looked exactly as he had in the conference room, composed, pressed, expensive, and very careful. But the court had the timeline chart by then. So did local co-counsel. So did the judge. Once dates are lined up in order, a lot of elegant language loses its usefulness. I did not speak during that hearing. I was not needed. That was one of the quiet lessons of the whole process. Once the facts are assembled correctly, the need to perform yourself begins to disappear. 2 weeks later, the bar opened an inquiry. 3 weeks after that, the court authorized deeper production and referred specific concerns for disciplinary review. A month later, local Montana co-counsel sought separate representation. That was the first sign the structure was cracking from inside. Then Elise called. It happened at 7:12 on a Tuesday evening while I was standing at the kitchen counter peeling an orange. Unknown number. Boise area code. I let it ring twice before answering. Hello. A pause. Then her voice. Daniel. I did not say her name back. I wasn't sure you'd answer. I almost didn't. Another pause. When she spoke again, her tone was different from the last months of our marriage. Softer, but not in a way that moved me. More like someone who had just realized softness might be useful again. I didn't know it was like this, she said. I looked at the orange peel in my hand and set it down on the cutting board. Like what? What Stephen and the filings and all of it. I knew he was handling things aggressively. I didn't know about document timing. I said nothing. She filled the silence the way people do when they are afraid of what silence means. I'm not saying I handled things well. I know I didn't. I know I hurt you. Yes, I said. She took a breath. I just need you to understand I wasn't part of legal strategy. That sentence told me more than anything else she had said. Not I'm sorry. Not I was wrong. I wasn't part of strategy. I leaned one hand on the counter and looked out the dark kitchen window at the wet reflection of the room. Elise. Yes. If you have documents or messages you haven't produced, give them to your counsel. That's it. That's the useful part. The line was quiet for a second. Then she asked, very carefully, do you hate me? I thought about answering that. Not because I needed to. Because I wanted to be accurate. No, I said. I know where to put what happened now. She started to say something else. Maybe my name. Maybe an apology she had not prepared well enough to trust. I did not stay for it. I ended the call. Then I finished peeling the orange. That was the third real consequence. Not legal. Personal. The past was no longer following me around asking to be refelt. It had gone where it belonged, into files, timelines, and boundaries. By early summer, the outcomes became public enough that even people who normally avoid legal news had heard some version of the story. A family law partner in Boise had been placed on administrative leave pending disciplinary findings connected to document sequencing misconduct and disclosure irregularities in multiple matters. Multiple matters. That part did not surprise Nora. People who do this rarely do it once, she said. Later, the local Montana co-counsel accepted a negotiated sanction related to filing integrity failures and withdrew from practice for a stated period. Smaller role, smaller penalty, still real. Stephen Vale's matter moved slower, as those things do when the people involved have money, reputation, and every incentive to stretch the road. But the direction had changed and was not changing back. Civilly, the divorce judgment was reopened in part, not erased like a movie ending, not wiped clean by poetic justice. reopened. Asset characterization was reviewed. Certain distributions were reevaluated. Fee conduct came under scrutiny. A negotiated settlement followed months later under court pressure and disciplinary exposure. The number mattered less to me than the mechanism. I recovered enough of what had been taken to make the point permanent. Funds returned. Fees adjusted. Certain costs reimbursed. A formal record entered acknowledging material disclosure and filing concerns. No one called it vindication. That was fine. I did not need a dramatic word. I needed the record corrected. As for Elise, the outcome was narrower and more ordinary. She was not charged with anything criminal. She was required to cooperate in the civil review, produce communications, and live with the revised financial consequences that followed from a divorce structure she had been happy to benefit from when it looked untouchable. That was enough. One afternoon, several months after the first diner conversation, Margaret Sloan came by the townhouse with revised estate summaries and sat with me in the study while I signed the final transition set. Primary control moved fully. Governance authority transferred. Advisory relationships became optional instead of mandatory. When it was done, she gathered her papers and said, "You've handled this more carefully than most people would." "I had practiced losing things," I said. She looked at me over the rim of her glasses. "That's not what I meant." I knew. What she meant was that I had not let money turn me reckless. I had used it to slow down, to hire competence, to let process reveal what anger alone never could. That was the resolution. Not that I became rich. Not that the people who harmed me suffered in exactly equal measure. The resolution was simpler. What happened to me was named correctly. The timeline was corrected. The numbers were revised. The paper matched the truth more closely than it had before. And once that happened, the rest of life had room to begin again. At the end of that long week, after Margaret left, I stayed in the study alone and looked at the old black divorce binder on the desk. It no longer felt heavy in the same way. It was just a file now. A finished one, mostly. I closed it, stacked it with the final orders and settlement documents, and placed the whole set into a new archive box labeled in plain block letters. Mercer Matter, closed. Then I carried it downstairs and set it on the shelf in the hall closet. Not hidden, not displayed, just stored where completed things belong. Then I washed my cup, dried the counter, and turned out the kitchen light. A few months later, my mornings had become ordinary again. That was not a small thing. I started waking up around 6 without an alarm. I would make coffee in the kitchen while the house was still quiet and stand by the window for a few minutes before the day started. Some mornings it rained. Some mornings the sky over the sound was clear enough to pick out the ferries moving across the water. I got used to the sound of my own steps in that house, the way the floor in the hallway gave a little near the study, the way the back door needed a firmer push when the weather changed. I found I liked small routines more than I ever had before. Grinding coffee beans, sorting the mail into neat stacks, wiping the counter after breakfast, watering the plants on Thursdays, taking a slow walk after dinner without checking my phone every 5 minutes. Money changed a lot of things quickly, but peace came back in quieter ways. The townhouse was never meant to be permanent, so by late summer I bought a house not far away. Nothing oversized, nothing built to impress anyone. 3 bedrooms, a small study, a clean garage, a narrow back garden with enough room for herbs, and one decent lemon tree in a pot that would need winter cover. The kind of place where deliveries go to the right door and neighbors wave without asking questions. I kept the old sedan. The trust office had it cleaned, serviced, and stored just like I asked. When it was returned to me, the inside looked almost too clean for a car that had held the hardest stretch of my life. I drove it once around the neighborhood on a gray Saturday morning, windows cracked slightly, heater running, hands steady on the wheel. It still had the same small pull to the right. Same faint rattle near the passenger door over rough pavement. I parked it in the garage beside a newer car I had bought because reliability is useful and drama is not. Then I stood there for a minute looking at both of them. One represented survival. The other represented capacity. I had room for both. The foundation work grew slowly after that. Deliberately. I did not want my name attached to 10 flashy initiatives in 6 months. I had seen enough of polished people using public goodness as a costume, so I kept the scope narrow at first. Housing stability grants. Emergency legal review for people caught in predatory civil situations. A small scholarship fund for adults trying to restart after financial collapse or family disruption. Quiet things. Useful things. One program mattered to me more than the others. We set up a fund for temporary vehicle housing support tied to winter shelter transitions in Montana, Idaho, and Eastern Washington. Nothing sentimental about it. Just practical help. Vouchers for safe parking programs. Cold weather kits. Motel placement for severe nights. Document assistance. Job clothing stipends. Quiet intervention before a bad month became a lost year. When the first summary report came in, I read every line. Not because I needed to approve the numbers, because I knew what those nights felt like from inside the windshield. Every now and then, Captain Lewis Garner called. He was the officer from the grocery store lot in Missoula. We had kept in touch after everything settled. Mostly short calls. Once in a while lunch if our schedules lined up. He had a dry sense of humor and the kind of patience that only shows up in people who have spent years talking to frightened strangers at odd hours. The first time he visited the new house, he stood in the kitchen looking around and said, "This is nicer than the parking lot." "That's true," I said. He nodded toward the coffee maker. "Still doing things in order." "Yes." He smiled once. "Good." We sat outside that afternoon with mugs in our hands and watched a man across the street teach a little girl how to ride a bike without training wheels. She kept wobbling. He kept jogging beside her with one hand near the seat, not holding, just close enough to help if needed. Lewis watched for a while and then said, "You know what I remember from that night?" "What?" "You didn't argue with me. I was tired." "No," he said. "It was more than that. You looked like a man who had run out of room to perform. That probably saved you some time." I thought about that later. He was right. When you are stripped down far enough, a certain kind of honesty becomes easier. Not noble honesty, just practical honesty. You stop wasting energy trying to look less hurt than you are. You answer the question in front of you. Then you wait. That still seemed true. I never heard from Stephen Vale directly again. Through counsel, yes. Through process, yes. Through filings, objections, negotiated language, and the long, slow mechanics of professional consequence. But not directly. That was probably for the best. There was nothing left to say that paper had not already said more cleanly. Elise sent one letter about a year after the settlement was finalized. Handwritten. Short. No excuses this time. Mostly apology. Though even then there were places where she seemed to be apologizing to the version of herself she no longer liked as much as to me. I read it once at the kitchen table with the afternoon light coming in low through the window. Then I folded it, put it back in the envelope, and stored it in a separate file. Not because I was saving it for someday, because it belonged to the past, and the past should be labeled properly. That became one of my rules. Label things properly. Money, grief, betrayal, responsibility, opportunity, regret. A lot of pain comes from putting things in the wrong category and then wondering why they keep turning up where they do not belong. On Sundays, I usually make a simple breakfast and go through the week ahead at the dining room table. Calendar, foundation notes, household list, calls I owe people back. Sometimes I write by hand for half an hour before I turn on a screen. Sometimes I just sit with the coffee and the quiet and let the house stay quiet with me. That, more than anything, feels like the life I was supposed to have all along. Not perfect, not dramatic, just ordered. A while back, one of the case managers from the housing fund asked if I would review a file personally. Normally I don't. We built the program so it wouldn't depend on me hovering over it. But she said this one was unusual. A man in Idaho had been pushed out of his own business by relatives who used a guardianship scare and a string of rushed signatures to corner him during a medical recovery. On paper, everything looked tidy. In sequence, it did not. She sent over the intake summary, and I read it at the study desk with the lamp on and rain moving against the window, same as before. Different names, different documents, same kind of pressure hiding inside official language. I made a note to look at it again the following week. Not because I was chasing a fight, because once you learn how certain systems bend the truth without breaking grammar, you start recognizing the shape sooner. And sometimes the most useful thing you can do for another person is help them slow the paper down before it closes over them. That night, I locked the back door, rinsed my cup, straightened the mail on the entry table, and turned off the downstairs lights one by one. The house settled around me the way homes do when everything is in its place. That was enough. If this story stayed with you, I'd appreciate it if you'd like the video and subscribe to the channel. And tell me in the comments what city you're watching from and what time it is where you are right now. I always like seeing where people are listening from. Two more popular stories will be waiting for you next, and I think you'll want to hear both of them.